Hello, my name is Rick Houston, and welcome to the Scene Vault Podcast, your source for all things NASCAR history. Presented by Las Vegas Motor Speedway, America's racing showplace.
When I'd show up at the garage gate to get my garage pass to go in and help Dad on his car, Bill would make me go get a haircut. I thought my hair was too long. And I'm going down the backstretch, get it up to speed, probably going 170 mile an hour. And it's like a bomb erupted. And out of my peripheral vision, I just see debris flying everywhere. So when they crashed, now I just seen them down there in the infield when I come by on the white flag lap. So I really didn't know much about the wreck until after the race, to be honest with you. I mean, the fight. So 81, I was worst year ever, probably, of all the years that I raced. Like I said, only ran a couple races, and I was actually working at Charlotte Motor Speedway selling tickets.
The day NASCAR and all of us associated in any way with NASCAR forget its past, that's the day we don't have any future.
Well, Chuck, first of all, how did you get involved in racing?
Well, it was my father raced, so I actually grew up in it. We were in Portland, Oregon at the time, and my dad was kind of a terror on the West Coast. He's a pretty good driver in his own right. And 1971, they built a new race car, replaced the old one. And I was 17 at the time and wanting to race, and so it was a good opportunity to put a trailer behind the truck and put the second car on there, and I'd run his tires from the week before and get the closest rear end ratio that wasn't exactly right because we didn't have two of everything, but we could actually pretty inexpensively carry it along and race it. So I was going to compete in what they called the Northern Tour, which on the West Coast, they race from Southern California clear up into Canada, and as far east sometimes as Colorado. Anyway, I was going to run, there's 10 events called the Northern Tour, and they were all boom, boom, boom. So when the California guys come up, they just stay and work on their cars between races and run all over the place. So that was my debut, as those first 10 events. It was pretty interesting. I started out horrible. I planned on...
That was 71?
Yes, 1971. Okay. Yeah. I was 17, and we planned, my first race was at a place called Salem, Oregon, where the capital is, about an hour from Portland. And we planned on going there a few days early because I'd never raced before. And this was a Winston West car. They were identical to Winston Cup cars. They had the 426 Hemi engine. It was a 70 Plymouth Roadrunner, drum brakes, manual steering, narrow tires that were still treaded even. A long time ago.
Yeah.
So we were going to go early, and I was going to get to do some practice and try to get the feel of the car and the track and whatever. And then it turned out getting two cars ready, we'd never done that before, and we just didn't have the manpower. Everybody was volunteering those days, and they stole a lot of parts to finish the new car off the old car, so we were scrambling to get it together. And the race was getting closer and closer to the Salem event, and we still weren't ready. So we thought, well, on race day, we'll just go a few hours early, and they'll let me on the track before festivities really get going, and I'll get some time. And, well, as it turned out, we were the last team to arrive at the racetrack. I unloaded the car. I think there's about 5 minutes left to practice. So I got just a couple laps in, and then I had to go qualify and race. But I made the race barely, and it was just so much different than I thought it was going to be. That car had so much horsepower. It was a quarter-mile oval, flat, slippery, and even on the middle of the front stretch at the start-finish line, if you tried to floor the accelerator, it'd light the rear tires up like a dragster.
Yeah.
And I was pretty much out of control, but I ended up spinning out one time in the race and finished 17th. I didn't hit anybody. I didn't wreck. So I guess it was okay, but it was just way different than I expected. But I think it was a pretty quick schooler because by the time the 10 events were over, I think I'd scored a fifth, a fourth, a ninth, a third, even a second. So,
okay. Yeah.
I was a good student.
Now, who did you meet first, Herschel McGriff or his daughter Debbie?
Herschel. I met Herschel when he first returned to racing. I guess it had been about 67. I was around a lot with my dad.
Yeah.
And Debbie and I didn't get together till about 71, I think it was, and then we married in 73.
Okay, all right. Now, you were talking about making your first ever starts of any kind in 1971, but then in 1972, you made that first Cup start at Riverside, and you were, 17, 18 years old?
I was still 17. That was going to be the 11th race of my life.
Yeah.
And it was a Cup event. So it was going to be my first Cup event, and it was going to be my first time on a road course because I hadn't been on a road course yet. So that was kind of interesting. And at the time...
How interesting was it?
Well, at the time... Bill Gazaway was the technical inspector for NASCAR, and his brother Joe was the head tech inspector.
Yeah.
And I had already had a couple situations with Bill prior to being a driver when I'd show up at the garage gate to get my garage pass to go in and help Dad on his car. Bill would make me go get a haircut. I thought my hair was too long. It wasn't crazy long, but a couple times that happened, like when I was 14, 15, whatever.
So your age wasn't an issue, just as long as you went and got a haircut.
You had to be 16 to get a NASCAR license at the time, but I was 16 for about 4 or 5 years. But so when I showed up to race at 17, he didn't make me go get a haircut, but they were a little tough on me getting through technical inspection. There was I think over 100 cars showed up to attempt to qualify for that race. And when I was going through tech inspection, they didn't like my fenders. They thought they were cut. The radius around the tire was a little too high. So they had me add a little strip of metal on there and pop rivet it on. And, of course, I was 17 and in a hurry. I wanted to get on the racetrack, and I was thrashing around trying to drill and pop rivet them on there, and I drilled my finger, so I had to go to the infield care center and get some Novocaine stitches and bandaged up and come back and finish the fenders. And then they looked at my window net. Window nets were new at that time. I think brand new, and they didn't like the way I had installed it. So Joe Gazaway said, well, why don't you do it this way, Chuck? And he told me how he wanted it. So I tore it apart and redid it and did it like he wanted it. He come back and looked at it and says, Chuck, I think the way you had it was better. Why don't you put it back like it was? So I didn't get off on a real good foot with NASCAR. But finally I got on the racetrack. Everybody else had been practicing for most of the day, but I finally got on the track, got some practice laps in, and I was able to qualify. I qualified deep, probably in the 30s, but, with 100 cars there, a lot more went home than got to actually start the race. So it was still, it was okay. And the race was nothing spectacular. I ended up wrecking in turn 8, the slowest turn on the course. I think it jumped out of gear, and I slid up off the track, hit some hay bales and a guardrail. It wasn't anything big, but enough to end our day. So that was my first Cup race.
Now, you were talking about you were pop riveting the extra metal onto the wheel wells and everything. Did you have anybody else there helping? Okay.
Yeah, high school friends that were very good mechanics too. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, we had 2 cars, and most of the veteran mechanics were with my dad because he actually had a chance to win the race. And I got whatever I can round up and bring, and we were all doing the best we could, and we were usually right next to each other, so I'd have resources for help and tools, and because we shared everything.
All right, so in my mind, I'm picturing. I know what I would have been like on a road trip like that with my high school buddies. And you're on a road trip with some of your high school buddies. I want to know that story.
They used to come down to the shop, and we'd work late at nights because everybody had day jobs. Well, we were still in school. But, the adults had, the man, whatever, they had day jobs. But they'd come and work at night, and we'd work till 10 or 11 at night all the time. And it's just the way we did it. And it was a great experience for them too. They weren't paid, but we did pay their expenses. We put them up in a hotel. Of course, we put 4 or 5 guys in a room, but they had to share. But fed them and took care of. It didn't cost them anything, but they weren't getting paid anything either. But it was quite an experience for them as well to get to go to these big races.
What was it like to be on the track with Richard Petty and Kel Yarborough and Bobby Allison and folks like that at 17 years old?
Well, I suppose it was a little bit intimidating, but I wasn't quite up there where I was banging fenders with them. I was a little ways behind them trying to learn and figure things out. But, as time went on, I got very comfortable racing with them, with those guys. But at first it was a little strange. I guess I didn't really think about it. I was so busy getting my car ready and trying to figure out how to drive it. And because in those days, we had to toe heel the clutch and the brake and the gas pedal, because we didn't have these shifters that you just move forward and backward. We had the full H, and you had to hold the brake on and hit the gas pedal with the same foot and then work the clutch with the left foot. Otherwise, you'd tear up the transmission downshifting.
Yeah.
So it was a lot different than it is nowadays, but it was fun. I really liked it. I loved a road race.
You ran your first couple of Cup races here on the East Coast in 1975 at Martinsville and Charlotte. What was the plan at that point? Were you looking to make that move full time at that point, or were you just kind of testing the waters?
Well, I got an opportunity in 75, a gentleman named Carl Joyner that used to compete against my father. Well, he kind of aged out of driving, and he wanted to go south and give me a shot. So he put together a plan, and we went to Martinsville was our first one. And my two cousins and I got in the truck, and we drove across the country to Martinsville with the race car, and we brought Firestone tires because at the time a guy named Marvin Porter that was a former driver was working for Firestone. Firestone had a pretty good short track tire. You had your choice in those days, Goodyear or Firestone. So Firestone made a deal with us, and we loaded up all the tires we needed to run 500 laps at Martinsville and headed on. And we were supposed to bring a spare engine with us, but it didn't quite get finished in time. So they said, well, we'll fly it out when it gets finished, so you'll have a spare engine, because we were going to do Martinsville and Charlotte. They were kind of back to back. So when we get to Martinsville early in practice, we blow an engine. And darn it, we don't have a spare. And here we are 3,000 miles from home. And a guy named Walter Ballard, he was a Cup driver back at the time. Yeah. He had a little short block on his truck, and he offered it to us, but it was going to be a lot of work to pull our blowing engine out, pull all the accessories, the cylinder heads and intake manifold and everything off of it, and trade it out and put the engine back in. So NASCAR let us remove the car from the infield, from the garage area, and we took it up to when I met the Hensleys, Hubert Hensley. He had a shop nearby in horse pasture. Yeah. So we went over there. At the time, Jeff Hensley, who ended up being my crew chief years later, well, he's only about 10 at that time. Yeah. So, because I was like 21 at the time. So we'd go to Hensley's and work about all night in their shop, getting it fixed back up, show up the next morning, and we qualify and make the race. And we're running along and running pretty decent, and rear hub seal comes out of the left rear hub. And the wheel bearing grease gets so hot using all those brakes at Martinsville, started making a lot of smoke. So I got black flagged, and that was the end of the day for us at Martinsville. Yeah.
Now, you went back to the West Coast, and you did wind up winning the Winston West Championship in 1976. How big a deal was that for you personally when it came to getting noticed by the folks on the East Coast?
Well, I think it was huge. At the time, racing was getting expensive, and my father had quit, and we were putting the efforts into one car for me and concentrating on the big shows. We weren't even running full time. We were just running a handful of races each year, which included the 3 Cup events, 2 at Riverside and 1 in Ontario. Well, at the off season of 75, 76, I got a call from a guy named Jack McCoy. There was a Jack McCoy from Modesto, California, that was a good driver in his own right and won some Winston West championships. But this was a Jack McCoy from Portland, Oregon. He was a good driver in the Northwest. Well, he was past his days of driving, and he was crew chief. And he gave me the call and says, "Are you interested in driving our car in the Winston West Series for a championship?" And I said, "Heck yeah!" So we got together and we did pretty well. I got right off the bat, I got my first win ever. That come hard, it seemed like, but I finally got one. And it was at Monroe, Washington, which is Evergreen Speedway just outside of Seattle. Yeah. And in those days, women couldn't go in the pits. I already had 2 little kids, and my wife was in the grandstand from 8 o'clock in the morning until the race got over, which was probably around 6 o'clock. I'm in victory lane. I'm signing autographs, getting my picture taken, having a big time. And in those days, they opened the gate to let the fans and family into the pit area so everybody can come in and get autographs or see their families and stuff. And my wife come up carrying one of our one that's just barely walking, or not even walking, and then the other one's a little bit older. She was walking, and she walked up to me at victory lane and said, "Here, it's your turn." She handed it off.
So much for the glow
of
winning.
Was over. Oh, I'll never forget that. Here, it's your turn.
Couldn't even carry your trophy home. Your arms were full of kids.
And I want to back up real quick and tell you a quick story of my second Cup experience, which was the 12th race of my life, first time on a super speedway. It was Ontario Motor Speedway, which was a carbon copy of Indianapolis Motor Speedway, 2.5 mile rectangle, 490-degree turns. Anyway, I'm going through, we show up, and at the time, I think second in command with NASCAR was a gentleman named Lynn Kugler.
Yeah.
And he used to remind me of Henry Kissinger. He kind of had that accent. I think he's German and whatever. And we had sent in an entry blank, and it was accepted. They sent a little card back in the mail that says your entry has been accepted. Well, by now I turned 18, but Lynn Kugler come up and says, Dick, talking to my car owner, my father, he says, Dick, this is an FIA-sanctioned race, and to compete as a driver in FIA, you have to be 21 years old. And if you have Chuck sit this race out, I'll go to bat for you with FIA and see if I can get that age lowered to 18. Well, we'd worked hard getting that car ready. Went 1,000 miles down there to do it, and I really wanted to race. And Dad got out that little card and showed him that our entry had been accepted. And Dad told Lynn, he says, Lynn, you don't let him drive this race, I'll own NASCAR. So I raced, and I had problems. Again, it's a quick story. It never happened since then, but my young high school friends helping me on the car, I got out and made a few laps. I think we had the wrong rear end ratio in it. So we were changing the rear end gear in the garage area, go back out after we get that done for some more practice. And I'm going down the backstretch, get it up to speed, probably going 170 mile an hour. And it's like a bomb erupted. And out of my peripheral vision, I just see debris flying everywhere. And I goes back into the garage area. We put it up on jack stands. And from the back of the engine all the way to the third member, there's nothing. The clutch was torn out. The bell housing was gone. The transmission was gone. The shifter went right through the floor with the transmission. The drive shaft's gone. I think somehow or another we didn't get the drive shaft in it correctly, and it come out of there at 170 mile an hour, and it brought everything with it all the way to the back of the engine. So we're scrambling around to get parts and get it back together because we didn't have everything. It even took the bell crank off. That's hardware that mechanical linkage that makes the clutch work, the throw-out bearing move, and all that stuff was gone. And so we were scrambling to get it back together and attempt to qualify. Again, they had 80 or 90 cars there, and I qualified, but I was way deep in the pack, but I made the race. But I was so glad I did because after that, going through that with NASCAR. So my first two Cup races have a little bit of controversy.
Oh, man. At what point did you feel ready to tackle Winston Cup on a more regular basis?
Well, really, in 76, I had a good enough car at Riverside that I knew I could run with those guys. I didn't get good finishes, but I was competitive. I was fast. I qualified 5th. I qualified 7th. Even when I went back east to Charlotte, back in 1975 with Carl Joyner's car, I felt like I was competitive. And the next year, 76, I went back again and ran 2 races with Jerry Craker and the Lakes Drywall team, the one that Jack McCoy hired me for. And we competed at Martinsville, and we had problems right off. I don't remember what happened. And then we went to Atlanta, which I'd never been to a high bank speedway like Atlanta before. Well, I guess I had. I run Charlotte the year before. But anyway, I qualified 10th at Atlanta. I'd never been there, never seen it. And I knew I could get around those places. I knew I could go. But, again, we had trouble. We didn't finish many 500-mile races in the early part of my career because we didn't know how to prepare a car for 500 miles. We were 200-lap short track people pretty much, know, and it's a little different.
You were in the field for one of the most iconic races in NASCAR history, the 1979 Daytona 500. Everybody knows everything there is to know about that race. Tell me a really good story about that week that nobody knows.
Well, I was going to made a deal with Jim Testa. He was from Chicago. He bought a truck stop in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, and he bought the Kelly Girl equipment, the Janet Guthrie car. Okay. But they had one car and a couple of engines and a truck and some pit equipment and a few spare parts, some rear end gears and stuff. So he bought all that stuff, and then he made a deal with me, and he hired me to work on the car, and I got to drive it. Well, Daytona was going to be our first race. I'd never raced at Daytona before, and we didn't go down there and test in advance or anything. So when I showed up, I thought, wow, this is I did get to go watch a race at Daytona in 1977 when I was Winston West champion. To back up a little bit, in 76, my wife and I got invited to the banquet in Daytona when Kelly Yarborough was champion. We got to sit right at the head table with Cale and Betty Jo. That was pretty cool. They did it right during Speed Weeks.
Really?
Yeah. And so then we sat up in the grandstand and watched the Daytona 500. And it was just like, wow, man, this is a big track.
Yeah.
Cars go by, zoom, and it's just like they're so fast. Well, when I finally get to go out for my first practice, I said, they say you got to hold it down around here all the way. I hope I can do that. And sure enough, I think the first corner I might have just burped it one time, and then that was it. I just left her on the mat after that. But I really didn't know what I was doing. I'd never prepared a car for Daytona, so I got it ready myself in that one bay truck stop in Kings Mountain, and I didn't even really have a shop floor because it was one of those dugout concrete bays where you walk down the steps so you can grease them and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that's where I got the car ready. I put it up on jack stands and go down underneath there and work on it. And a lot of people helped me, give me advice or whatever, and I asked a lot of questions. But we ended up renting an engine from Robert Yates. That was used engine. He was at Dygard at the time. I think he rented us the engine for $3,000. And it had good horsepower, and it run the whole way. It did all the practice, did the 125, and it did the 500. And when it was all said and done, we finished 7th, and I think we won $20,000. And I mean, it was a great day. I thought, well, this isn't so tough. I didn't really think that. It was a wild race. They had just paved the track. A lot of cars showed up. It happened to be the very first Daytona 500 for not just myself, but also Dale Earnhardt, Terry Labonte, Harry Gant, Joe Milliken, Jeff Bodine, Bill Elliott, all these guys. It was their first Daytona 500, and I was lucky enough to finish ahead of all of them.
That's a nice stat. I like the way that you had that stat in your back pocket ready to roll out. Did you see anything of the wreck at the end? I guess once you came around, you saw.
No,
it.
I was running with in the pack with AJ and Waltrip and Richard, and I'd been running with them the whole second half of the race. But somehow or another, Cale and Donnie got off, and they got a full straightaway, maybe in a half a lap ahead of the second pack. So when they crashed, now I just seen them down there in the infield when I come by on the white flag lap. So I really didn't know much about the wreck until after the race, to be honest with you. I mean, the fight.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that was actually going on. So
wow.
I knew that they'd wrecked, but it was interesting. There was quite a few wrecks that race, and there was some good dodging going on. I remember Harry Gant crashed off turn 4. It was a multi-crash.
Yeah.
And he slid left into that infield wall by the tunnel there, and he hit it so hard, bounced him right back out in front of me, and I had to do a quick chicane, and I was lucky I didn't wreck myself or hit something. And then we went in. I had a volunteer pit crew again when we got there. My dad flew out from Oregon to be my crew chief because Jim Testa, I don't know if he'd ever been to a NASCAR race. He didn't know anything about it. We really didn't have anyone to call the shots or, prepare. So Dad flew out and helped me all week and was the crew chief and called the shots in the pits. Well, when these wrecks happen, there's debris everywhere that you're driving through. And you're worried about, man, if we go back to green and I got a leaking tire that goes flat, that's not going to be good. So about the whole field would come in and get 4 tires, even back then, just like I say, because of the debris. They didn't need to be changed, but didn't want to have cut one. And my first pit stop with a volunteer pit crew that had never worked together before was so slow I got lapped under the caution. Daytona. It takes like a minute to make a pace lap under caution at Daytona. And I was in there so long, they were having problems with a fender or something and just couldn't get the tire on. And bless their heart, they were trying as hard as they could. And we went down a lap, and I wasn't able to make that lap.
Did they have one of those screw jacks that you change your passenger car with or something?
No, but I don't know, didn't get jacked high enough or something. But they were having an awful time. And so I went down a lap, and I wasn't quite strong enough to make that lap up. I could hang on to the draft, but I couldn't pass them all. And so I just run the rest of the race a lap down and finished 7th. But otherwise, I think I'd have been a little higher up yet.
Wow.
You
wound up driving for a handful of different owners. In 1981, you just made 3 Cup starts. At what point did you pack up and maybe try something different for a while?
Well, during that time, I got a ride with a late model sportsman car at Hickory. A guy named Bobby Wellman had a car and didn't have a driver, and he asked me to drive it. And a guy named Phil Combs that has a museum over in Shelby, he kind of got us together.
Okay, yeah.
He asked me, what are you going to do? I was driving for Johnny Ray at the time. It was when I first moved south in 78 before I got up with Testa. And Johnny Ray kind of tight on funds, run out of money, and we did 4 or 5 races and said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he says, well, I know this guy has got a car. Well, we got together and raced at Hickory and did pretty good. I think I won about the second or third race I went there, past Harry with about 15 laps to go. His car, he's faster than I was, but he'd run his tires off, and I was slow and steady and passed him, took the lead, and won the race. It was pretty cool. But eventually that deal even ended. We just run out of money. I think I blew a tire in 1980 and crashed the car pretty hard and ruined it, and that was kind of the end of it because there was no funds to keep it going.
Yeah.
So 81, I was worst year ever probably of all the years that I raced. Like I said, only ran a couple races, and I was actually working at Charlotte Motor Speedway selling tickets. Humpy Wheeler gave me a job.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
I sure did. Because I needed something, and he let me come and go as I needed if I got a ride or whatever, and got to go somewhere and race. You know, there was no strings attached, but it just helped me out. I was trying. My wife was a nurse, and she'd keep most of the food on the table, but I was trying too.
Yeah.
I also got to go gas his car and wash it once a week.
Humpy's?
Truth, yeah.
Humpy's?
By the way, Chuck, will you go wash my car?
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, I was grateful. I mean, you know, I needed a job.
How difficult was that for you?
Well, you know, it builds character. I mean, it really does. I was knocked down many, many times, and, you know, you just come back. And I was seriously thinking of throwing in the towel. My father had a used auto parts business in Portland, and I had 2 little kids. I'd moved out there and give it a shot moved there in 78, and now it's 81, and things aren't getting better. They're going the wrong way. I'm not getting any opportunities. It's the Busch Series hadn't even started yet. And
now you moved to North Carolina in 78?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, Huntersville, actually.
Yeah.
And things just really weren't going all that good. So I told myself, if I don't have something for the 82 season, I think I'm going to pack in and go back. My wife and kids deserve better than this, or go in the debt. And Ken Squire, whom I had gotten to know years before in the 70s from the races in California, Riverside and Ontario, he used to do those radio shows in the local lounges or malls or whatever, and he asked me to do some of them even clear back in the 70s. So he knew me, fairly good. Well, at the time, he was involved with a series they called NASCAR North, and he owned a couple of tracks up there. And he was also good friends with Lou Bannell, who was the head of U.S. Tobacco. Well, he had talked U.S. Tobacco into sponsoring a car in the NASCAR North Series, and he kind of wanted to bring in a new name. So he offered me, he says, you interested in coming up to NASCAR North? He says, I know it's not cup racing, but there's a guy with a car up there that got a pretty decent car. He won a championship a year or 2 before, and U.S. Tobacco is interested in sponsoring somebody, and I'd like to bring in a new name, new blood, and new interest. And I says, yeah, I'm interested. So we got together. I flew up there to Burlington, Vermont, and rented a car and stayed the night at his home. This is January. It's 20 below zeros.
Wow. Yeah.
Just turning 1982. And then the next morning I drive over to Littleton, New Hampshire, where Quint Bovair is, the guy that owned the NASCAR North car and didn't have a driver. So he had parted ways with Harmon Beaver Dragon that won the championship with him a few years before. So we got together and talked about it and discussed it, and we thought, well, we'll give it a shot. So that year I went home went back to Charlotte, sold my house, or Huntersville, sold my house, and moved to New Hampshire and packed up my belongings and my wife and kids. We headed off again to a new adventure. And when we arrived, it was April, and we pulled into a little campground there. At the time, I had a motorhome and had a trailer behind it and a car too, or a little pickup I was following with. And we take the shortcut by the map, and I thought, well, let's take this way. Well, I didn't know what frosties were, but they have frosties in New England that when the road freezes, it swells up underneath from the moisture, and there's some big bumps and windy roads. And I took the shortest route, but it was not the quickest route. Tires were bottoming out. It was smoking. And tree limbs laying over, hitting them. And we finally get to the campground, and then it snows about 12 inches. My wife said, where the heck did you bring me? But it worked out great. Had a great time. Quint was a great guy, and just had a lot of fun up there. Met a lot of people and raced all over the Northeast and Canada, Southeast Canada.
You won a Busch North combination race up at Oxford in 1986. And again, there were at least 5 future members of the NASCAR Hall of Fame in that race. How big a deal was it for you to win in front of that crowd?
It was huge. It was really big. It gave me the confidence to know I can do this, because, like I said, there was a lot of Cup drivers there too as well. And it was interesting because they made it a Busch Grand National event. It was on our schedule too as NASCAR North. We had to run, we had to run their tires, which was a Goodyear tire, and up in New England we were running the McCreary tire. Well, their characteristics were quite a bit different. We might have knew the track a little bit better, but they knew the tires a little bit better. Well, with the McCreary tires, the strategy was always pit early in the Oxford 250, pit one time, get 4 tires and top off your fuel, and you're good to the end of the race. So we tried that strategy. We thought we'll pit early and inherit the lead easily when everybody else drops into pit, and then we can hopefully hang on to the lead and win the race. Well, we pitted so early, and the tires had a give-up factor that was greater than the McCreary's. I didn't realize that. So 50 laps after we pitted, we're leading the race, and the rest of them guys come in and get tires, and they're blowing by me like I'm tied to a post. Well, 50 laps to go, another caution comes out, and I talk my car owner into let's pit and put on 4 tires again because we're not going to win this thing.
Yeah.
And we did. My God, I passed them all and went to the front and won the race. It was a great night. I smiled for a week after that.
You're still smiling.
It was a great experience.
How did you get hooked up with Hubert and Jeff Hensley?
Well, I decided at the '88 season, which was my final year with Quint Bover and U.S. Tobacco, I decided I was really hoping that with U.S. Tobacco I'd make a good enough impression on them. I'd maybe get an opportunity down south. I could see that was not going to happen. So I told them early in the year, I'm going to resign. I'm not going to be back next year. And I put the word out, hoping that somebody down south would give me a call and try to put something together. Because in the meantime, Cup was taking off. Busch was starting to take off. It had been formed and was being very successful. So I put the word out, and Hensley's contacted me, but at the time they didn't have a sponsor, and they couldn't really promise me anything solid. This was getting later in the year, but I didn't have any other offers, and I thought, well, let's give it a shot. Even if it's part-time, I'll figure out how to keep food on the table. So I did, and before the season started, we'd gotten together with Nescafe and Nestle and made a presentation. Mark Garrow made the presentation for us, and we ended up getting the deal. There's 3 or 4 teams that went to him with presentations, and we were lucky enough to get the deal. It wasn't the big deal that everybody probably thought it was, but it was enough to let us run full time. But we still had to watch the money pretty well. In fact, I even worked in the car the first year because we were on a tight budget and couldn't afford the employees that it really took to run a Busch team like they need to be run. But we did pretty good. We had a pretty good year. And the second year we had a fantastic year. So it all worked out really, really well.